Hello friends, welcome again. Friends, in our last video lecture, we discussed S.T. Coleridge and his theory of imagination. Coleridge lived during the period of Romantic Revival from 1798 to 1830. After this period, we have the age of Queen Victoria, which is also known as Victorian age. Victorian age, starting from 1830 to 1900. During this 70 years, we have two most important critics in English literature, and they are John Ruskin and Matthew Arnold. Friends, in this video lecture, today we want to discuss John Ruskin's contribution to art and literature. Ruskin, who was born in 1819 and died in 1900, is considered as one of the greatest art critics of the Victorian age. He had much impact. His views or his critical theories had much impact on the evaluation of art during the 19th and 20th century. James Najarian, he has rightly called him as the most highly theoretical of Victorian critics. His personal views on painting, sculpture and architecture, they are still influential on a host of poets. So many poets and critics who lived during the 19th and 20th century. Moreover, we know John Ruskin as an artist, as an art critic, but he was also a great social reformer. Why? Because he gave away all his property, all his inheritance or earnings to the society after his death. John Ruskin had complete faith in God, and he believed that nature and beauty are the gifts of God. Friends, this is very important to understand his connection to God. Why? Because when he writes his views on art and literature, he connects his views he connects art with God and with nature, that we are going to discuss today. Ruskin's most critical comments are mainly found in these three works, as you can see here on the screen, and they are Modern Painters. Modern Painters, it is published in 5 different volumes from 1843 to 1860. Another important critical document written by John Ruskin is The 7 Lamps of Architecture, published in 1849. And the third one is The Stones of Venice, published in 3 different volumes from 1851 to 1853. So friends, we will focus our discussion on Ruskin's views as expressed in these 3 major critical documents. In all his books and articles, Ruskin has mainly given emphasis, he has mainly stressed the connection between nature, art and society. He believed that you cannot detach art from nature and nature from society. He was a naturalist and he was an artist, and he also became a social reformer. He believed that it is the responsibility of an artist to aim at social reform. He lived, if you examine his personal life, he lived a very sorry or very unhappy life, but he has been remembered as a great commentator, a great critique on art and aesthetics. Now, this is just kind of introduction that I wanted to give you about John Ruskin as a critic. Now we want to examine what critical theories he has expressed in his critical documents. Number one, which is very important, is that Ruskin's views on art and morality. Ruskin, for him, art and morality cannot be separated. He believed that the ultimate aim of each and every art is didactic, or is to teach some moral lessons to the society. He believed that both art and morality must go hand in hand. According to him, good art must be didactic by nature. Didactic means it must teach something to the society, to the citizens. We might not be aware of the food digestion. To understand this, I am just giving an example. Like when we eat some food, and then the food enters into our stomach, right? But a process takes place within the stomach, and that process is called the process of digestion. When the digestion is going on, we do not feel anything, right? We are not much aware of this process of digestion. In the same manner, Ruskin believed that we learn when we read books, when we read poetry, unknowingly, unconsciously, we learn some moral lessons. We are not aware of that. Okay. For example, take this poem written by Alexander Pope. The title of this poem is Ode on Solitude. The poem begins with these lines: happy the man whose wish and care a few paternal acres bound, content to breathe his native air in his own ground. The whole poem actually expresses the poet's idea that it is always better to live in the lap of nature. Here in this poem, the poet, tries to teach us the importance of nature and the importance of loneliness or solace in our life. So, when we read such poems, unknowingly, unconsciously, we learn and we receive some messages, moral messages from art and literature, and that is the function of art and literature according to John Ruskin. But friends, when we talk about moralism in literature, when we talk about teaching moral lessons to the reader, we must remember Plato. Why? Because in one of my previous videos when I discussed Plato, I said that Plato was a moralist. And in this video, I told you that Ruskin was also a moralist. Okay, both were moralists, but there is a difference between Plato and Ruskin. In Plato's times, it so happened that there was a general belief among the people, among the critics, among the scholars, that the function of art is to instruct or to teach something to the readers. Okay, and the secondary function was to delight the readers. Okay, but Plato opposed the poets in his times. He rejected poets and poetry by saying that morality and delight cannot go together. Okay, and that's why Plato condemned art, because it was immoral in his times. In Plato's times, there were some poets who were writing some immoral poetry, and that's why he rejected the poets and poetry from his country. He banished the poets from his country. But Ruskin, if you compare Plato with Ruskin, Ruskin welcomed art and the poets because art was highly moral during the Victorian era. For Ruskin, the main duty of an artist is to create nobility, to achieve nobility, to express some noble thoughts, serious thoughts in poetry is the primary job of the poet. Okay, Ruskin believed that art expresses the truth and morals delightfully. So delight is there. Okay, art delights the reader, poetry delights the reader, but at the same time poetry must also teach something to the reader. So there is a kind of similarity between Plato and Aristotle, but however there is a difference between Plato and Ruskin. Similarity is that both were moralists, and the difference is that Plato rejected poets and poetry on the moral grounds, and Ruskin welcomed the poets and poetry on the same moral grounds. Okay. Another important thing that we must remember and study when we are studying Ruskin as a critic is his views on imagination. Okay. But to understand his views on imagination, first of all, let's try to understand how Ruskin has defined poetry. Okay, Ruskin defines poetry and literature as you can see here on the screen. He defines poetry and literature as the suggestion by the imagination of noble grounds for noble emotions. Okay, here noble grounds can be understood as the themes, okay, the subject matter taken up by the poets. Okay, he believed that poetry must suggest some noble grounds. So he is actually talking about the content or the subject matter of poetry. He believed that the subject matter must be morally noble, highly noble. Okay, and he also talks about noble emotions. Okay, noble emotions means the emotions of love, admiration and joy on the one hand, and hatred, scorn and grief on the other hand. That means he talks about two different types of emotions, right? On the one hand he talks about love, and on the other hand he talks about hatred. Then he talks about admiration, but on the other hand he talks about scorn. On the one hand he talks about joy, and on the other hand he talks about sadness or grief. All these opposite emotions, they must be combined in poetry according to Ruskin, and this combination of opposite emotions give a kind of poetic feeling to the readers. Okay, and to present these emotions, the poet or the painter or the artist needs one tool. And what is the tool? That is the tool of imagination. Okay, according to Ruskin, there are three functions of imagination in poetry. In my previous videos, in my previous video, I discussed Coleridge's views on imagination, secondary imagination. Here, Ruskin, perhaps you can say, he goes in the same line of Coleridge, but he explains this imagination with some different words. Okay, according to him, imagination has three functions to do, and they are to associative imagination. It combines various images and thereby creates something new. Okay, so the imagination of the poet, when the poet observes something, he receives some impressions of those objects which he has observed. Okay, so images, he receives some images, and to combine these images he needs the power of imagination. Second function is contemplative, to do contemplation. This justifies the combination of various images. So after the combination, to justify whether the combination is proper or not, the poet has to contemplate within his own mind. And the third function is to penetrative imagination. This imagination analyzes and finds out the truth. So the ultimate aim of art, according to Ruskin, is to express the truth, and this truth is attained by penetrative imagination. If I use the words of Ruskin, Ruskin writes that this imagination penetrates, analyzes, and reaches the truths by no other faculty discoverable, right? So, all in all, you can say, Ruskin had a belief that imagination plays a very important role in the process of creation, and this imagination has these three different functions. Okay, we also must study Ruskin as an art critic. Why? Because he was the man who popularized the idea of truth to nature, which encouraged this idea, encouraged so many painters, to closely observe the landscape, and in doing so capture the natural world as truthfully as possible. He believed that the artist must observe the landscapes, natural landscapes, nature, okay, and then he must photographically or truthfully present, realistically present the beauty of nature. He also criticized, John Ruskin criticized the poets and artists who romanticized nature in their works. And this is the difference between Victorian criticism and the Romantic criticism. If you read the poems, the lyrical poems written during the period of Romantic revival, like Coleridge, William Wordsworth, Shelley and all, you find too much of romanticism in their poetry, but Ruskin was against that. He believed that no romanticism is allowed. He believed in naturalism. He believed that the poets must present nature as it is without exaggerating the beauty of nature. His idea that nature must be represented in art in its raw form, okay, in its raw means original form. This idea influenced the pre-Raphaelite poets during the 19th century. Pre-Raphaelite poets, this is the name given to a group of young artists who rejected the contemporary notion of the artistic beauty. So Ruskin gave much emphasis, he stressed on realistic presentation of nature in art, and this gave birth to a new movement during the 19th century which is known as naturalism. So you can say that Ruskin was one of the pioneers of this new movement called naturalism. Naturalism means to express nature in its original form without exaggerating or without romanticizing the things, the objects of nature. So Ruskin was concerned more with truth than natural beauty. So this is what we must remember about John Ruskin. So friends, here let's conclude the whole discussion by saying that Ruskin linked art and morality, as in the beginning of this lecture I said. Why? Because Ruskin himself was a moralist. So he advocated for moralism, for morality in art and literature. He also showed us the importance of nature and truth in literature. He advised the poets to present nature in its original raw form in their literature. However, some critics have opposed John Ruskin and his theory of morality. Okay, why? Because there is a debate which is a never ending debate that whether art should preach morals, art should teach moral lessons and aim at social reform. This debate is going on. So some of the critics believe that John Ruskin, when he says that art must teach some moral lessons to the reader, some critics have rejected John Ruskin's this theory. Okay, and this theory actually goes against John Dryden's theory, because John Dryden, in my previous lecture I told that Dryden believed that delight is the chief, if not the only end of poetry. According to Dryden, delight is the most important function of drama. Delight is the most important function of poetry, but according to Ruskin, to teach is the most important function. So here you can say both are going in different lines, but at the end, to conclude, we can say that Ruskin was a champion who believed not in art for art's sake, but he was a champion who believed in art for life's sake. He believed that art has a responsibility in human life, in human civilization. So friends, here we come to the end of this discussion. Friends, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon so that whenever I upload a new video, you'll get the notification. Thank you very much.